Alright, welcome back to DJX Chronicles. I'm sorry for the long break and all the complaining in between, but this one is On Dreams by Aristotle. Same one I bit off more than I could chew on, but written in 350 BCE. Part 1. We must, in the next place, investigate the subject of the dream, and first inquire to which of the faculties of the soul it presents itself. For example, whether the affection is one which pertains to the faculty of intelligence or to that of sense perception. For these are the only faculties within us by which we acquire knowledge. If, then, the exercise of the faculty of sight is actual seeing, that of the auditory faculty, hearing, and in general, that of the faculty of sense perception, perceiving. And if there are some perceptions common to the senses, such as figure, magnitude, motion, etc., while there are others, as color, sound, taste, peculiar each to its own sense, and further, if all creatures, when the eyes are closed in sleep, are unable to see, and the analogous statement is true of the other senses, so that manifestly we perceive nothing when asleep, we may conclude that it is not by sense perception we perceive a dream. But neither is it by opinion that we do so, for in dreams we not only assert, for example, that some object approaching is a man or a horse, which would be an exercise of opinion, but that the object is white or beautiful, points on which opinion, without sense perception, asserts nothing, either truly or falsely. It is, however, a fact that the soul makes such assertions in sleep. We seem to see equally well that the approaching figure is a man, and that it is white. In dreams, too, we think something else over and above the dream presentation, just as we do in waking moments when we perceive something, for we often also reason about that which we perceive. So, too, in sleep we sometimes have thoughts other than the mere phantasms immediately before our minds. This would be manifest to anyone who should attend and try, immediately on arising from sleep, to remember his dreaming experience. There are cases of persons who have seen such dreams. Those, for example, who believe themselves to be mentally arranging a given list of subjects according to the mnemonic rule. They frequently find themselves engaged in something else besides the dream, viz., that means, in other words, setting a phantasm which they envisage into its mnemonic position. Hence, it is plain that not every phantasm in sleep is a mere dream image, and that the further thinking which we perform then is due to an exercise of the faculty of opinion. So much, at least, is plain on all these points, viz., that the faculty by which, in waking hours, we are subject to illusions, when affected by disease, is identical with that which produces illusory effects in sleep. So, even when persons are in excellent health and know the facts of the case perfectly well, the sun, nevertheless, appears to them to be only a foot wide. Now, whether the presentative faculty of the soul be identical with, or different from, the faculty of sense perception, in either case, the illusion does not occur without our actually seeing or otherwise perceiving something. Even to see wrongly or to hear wrongly can happen only to one who sees or hears something real, though not exactly what he supposes. But we have assumed that in sleep one neither sees nor hears, nor exercises any sense whatever. Perhaps we may regard it as true that the dreamer sees nothing, yet as false that his faculty of sense perception is unaffected. The fact being that the sense of seeing and the other senses may possibly be then in a certain way affected, while each of these affections, as duly as when he is awake, gives its impulse in a certain manner to his primary faculty of sense, though not in precisely the same manner as when he is awake. Sometimes, too, opinion says to dreamers, just as to those who are awake, that the object seen is an illusion. At other times, it is inhibited and becomes a mere follower of the phantasm. It is plain, therefore, that this affection, which we name dreaming, is no mere exercise of opinion or intelligence, but yet is not an affection of the faculty of perception in the simple sense. If it were the latter, it would be possible when asleep to hear and see in the simple sense. How then, and in what manner it takes place, is what we have to examine. Let us assume, what is indeed clear enough, that the affection of dreaming pertains to sense perception as surely as sleep itself does. For sleep does not pertain to one organ in animals and dreaming to another. Both pertain to the same organ. But since we have, in our work on the soul, treated of presentation, and the faculty of presentation is identical with that of sense perception, though the essential notion of a faculty of presentation is different from that of a faculty of sense perception. And sense perception is the movement set up by a sensory faculty when actually discharging its function, while a dream appears to be a presentation, for a presentation which occurs in sleep, whether simply or in some particular way, is what we call a dream. It manifestly follows that dreaming is an activity of the faculty of sense perception, but belongs to this faculty qua presentative. Part 2. We can best obtain a scientific view of the nature of the dream and the manner in which it originates by regarding it in the light of the circumstances attending sleep. The objects of sense perception, corresponding to each sensory organ, produce sense perception in us, and the affection due to their operation is present in the organs of sense, not only when the perceptions are actualized, but even when they have departed. What happens in these cases may be compared with what happens in the case of projectiles moving in space. For in the case of these, the movement continues, even when that which set up the movement is no longer in contact with the things that are moved. For that which set them in motion moves a certain portion of air, and this, in turn, being moved, excites motion in another portion, and so, accordingly, it is in this way that the bodies, whether in air or in liquids, continue moving until they come to a standstill. This we must likewise assume to happen in the case of qualitative change. For that part which, for example, has been heated by something hot, heats in turn the part next to it, and this propagates the affection continuously onward until the process has come round to its point of origin. This must also happen in the organ wherein the exercise of sense perception takes place, since sense perception, as realized in actual perceiving, is a mode of qualitative change. This explains why the affection continues in the sensory organs, both in their deeper and in their more superficial parts, not merely while they are actually engaged in perceiving, but even after they have ceased to do so. That they do this, indeed, is obvious in cases where we continue for some time engaged in a particular form of perception. For then, when we shift the scene of our perceptive activity, the previous affection remains. For instance, when we have turned our gaze from sunlight into darkness, for the result of this is that one sees nothing, owing to being excited by the light still subsiding in our eyes. Also, when we have looked steadily for a while at one color, for example at white or green, that to which we next transfer our gaze appears to be of the same color. Again, if after having looked at the sun or some other brilliant object, we close the eyes, then if we watch carefully, it appears in a right line with the direction of vision, whatever this may be. At first, in its own color, and then it changes to crimson, next to purple, and then it becomes black and disappears. And also, when persons turn away from looking at objects in motion, like rivers and especially those which flow very rapidly, they find that the visual stimulation still presents themselves. For the things really at rest are then seen moving. Persons become temporarily deaf after hearing loud noises, and after smelling very strong odors, their power of smelling is impaired. And similarly, in other cases. These phenomena manifestly take place in the way above described. That the sensory organs are acutely sensitive to even a slight qualitative difference in their objects is shown by what happens in the case of mirrors, a subject to which, even taking it independently, one might devote close consideration and inquiry. At the same time, it becomes plain from them that as the eye, in seeing, is affected by the object seen, so also it produces a certain effect upon it. If a woman chances during her menstrual period to look into a highly polished mirror, the surface of it will grow cloudy with a blood-colored haze. That was a superstition at the time. Poor guy. It is very hard to remove this stain from a new mirror, but easier to remove from an older mirror. As we have said before, the cause of this lies in the fact that in the act of sight there occurs not only a passion in the sense organ acted on by the polished surface, but the organ as an agent also produces an action, as is proper to a brilliant object. For sight is the property of an organ possessing brilliance and color. The eyes, therefore, have their proper actions, as have other parts of the body. Because it is natural to the eyes to be filled with blood vessels, a woman's eyes during the period of menstrual flux and inflammation will undergo a change, although her husband will not note this, since his seed is of the same nature as that of his wife. I don't know anything about that one, because I'm the husband. Clearly, I can't see it. Ha ha! I'm just kidding. He's totally wrong about that. The surrounding atmosphere, through which operates the action of sight, and which surrounds the mirror also, will undergo a change of the same sort that occurred shortly before in the woman's eyes, and hence the surface of the mirror is likewise affected. And as in the case of a garment, the cleaner it is, the more quickly it is soiled. So the same holds true in the case of the mirror. For anything that is clean will show quite clearly a stain that it chances to receive. And the cleanest object shows up even the slightest stain. A bronze mirror, because of its shininess, is especially sensitive to any sort of contact. The movement of the surrounding air acts upon it like a rubbing or pressing or wiping. On that account, therefore, what is clean will show up clearly the slightest touch on its surface. It is hard to cleanse smudges off of a new mirror because the stain penetrates deeply and is suffused to all parts. It penetrates deeply because the mirror is not a dense medium and is suffused widely because of the smoothness of the object. On the other hand, in the case of old mirrors, stains do not remain because they do not penetrate deeply, but only smudge the surface. From this, therefore, it is plain that stimulatory motion is set up even by slight differences, and that sense perception is quick to respond to it. And further, that the organ which perceives color is not only affected by its object, but also reacts upon it. Further evidence to the same point is afforded by what takes place in wines, and in the manufacture of unguents. For both oil, when prepared, and wine become rapidly infected by the odors of the things near them. They not only acquire the odors of the things thrown into or mixed with them, but also those of the things which are placed or which grow near the vessels containing them. In order to answer our original question, let us now therefore assume one proposition which is clear from what precedes, viz., that even when the external object of perception has departed, the impressions it has made persist, and are themselves objects of perception. And let us assume, besides, that we are easily deceived respecting the operations of sense perception when we are excited by emotions, and different persons according to their different emotions. For example, the coward when excited by fear, the amorous person by amorous desire, so that with but little resemblance to go upon, the former thinks that he sees his foes approaching, the latter that he sees the object of his desires. And the more deeply one is under the influence of the emotion, the less similarity is required to give rise to these illusory impressions. This, too, both in fits of anger and also in all states of appetite. All men become easily deceived, and more so the more their emotions are excited. This is the reason, too, why persons in the delirium of fever sometimes think they see animals on their chamber walls, an illusion arising from the faint resemblance to animals of the markings thereon, when put together in patterns. And this sometimes corresponds with the emotional states of the sufferers, in such a way that, if the latter be not very ill, they know well enough that it is an illusion. But if the illness is more severe, they actually move according to the appearances. The cause of these occurrences is that the faculty in virtue of which the controlling sense judges is not identical with that in virtue of which presentations come before the mind. A proof of this is that the sun presents itself as only a foot in diameter, though often something else gainsays the presentation. Again, when the fingers are crossed, the one object placed between them is felt by the touch as two, but yet we deny that it is two, for sight is more authoritative than touch. Yet if touch stood alone, we should actually have pronounced the one object to be two. The ground of such false judgments is that any appearances whatever present themselves not only when its object stimulates a sense, but also when the sense by itself alone is stimulated, providing only it be stimulated in the same manner as it is by the object. For example, to persons sailing past, the land seems to move, when it is really the eye that is being moved by something else, the moving ship. Talk about a tongue twister. Part 3. From this, it is manifest that the stimulatory movements based upon sensory impressions, whether the latter are derived from external objects or from causes within the body, present themselves not only when persons are awake, but also then when this affection which is called sleep has come upon them, with even greater impressiveness. For by day, while the senses and the intelligence are working together, they, that being such movements, are extruded from consciousness, or obscured, just as a smaller is beside a larger fire, or a small beside great pains or pleasures. Though as soon as the latter have ceased, even those which are trifling emerge into notice. But by night, that is, in sleep, owing to the inaction of the particular senses, and their powerlessness to realize themselves, which arises from the reflux of the hot from the exterior parts to the interior. They, being the above movements, are borne into the headquarters of sense perception, and there display themselves as the disturbance of waking life subsides. We must suppose that, like the little eddies which are being ever formed in rivers, so the sensory movements are each a continuous process, often remaining like what they were when first started, but often, too, broken into other forms by collisions with obstacles. This, moreover, gives a reason why no dreams occur in sleep immediately after meals, or to sleepers who are extremely young, like to infants. The internal movement in such cases is excessive, owing to the heat generated from the food. Hence, just as in a liquid, if one vehemently disturbs it, sometimes no reflected image appears, while at other times one appears indeed, but utterly distorted, so as to seem quite unlike its original. While, when once the motion has ceased, the reflected images are clear and plain. In the same manner, during sleep, the phantasms, or residuary movements, which are based upon the sensory impressions, become sometimes quite obliterated by the above-described motion when too violent, while at other times the sights are indeed seen, but confused and weird, and the dreams which then appear are unhealthy, like those of persons who are atrabilious or feverish or intoxicated with wine. For all such affections, being spirituous, cause much commotion and disturbance. In sanguineous animals, in proportion as the blood becomes calm, and as its pure are separated from its less pure elements. The fact that movement, based on impressions derived from each of the organs of sense, is preserved in its integrity, renders the dreams healthy, causes a clear image to present itself, and makes the dreamer think, owing to the effects borne in from the organ of sight, that he actually sees, and owing to those which come from the organ of hearing, that he really hears, and so on with those also which proceed from the ordinary sensory organs. For it is owing to the fact that the movement which reaches the primary organ of sense comes from them, that one, even when awake, believes himself to see, or hear, or otherwise perceive, just as it is from a belief that the organ of sight is being stimulated, though in reality not so stimulated, that we sometimes erroneously declare ourselves to see, or that, from the fact that touch announces two movements, we think that the one object is two. For as a rule, The governing sense affirms the report of each particular sense, unless another particular sense, more authoritative, makes a contradictory report. In every case, an appearance presents itself, but what appears does not in every case seem real, unless when the deciding faculty is inhibited, or does not move with its proper motion. Moreover, as we said, that different men are subject to illusions, each according to the different emotion present in him. So it is that the sleeper, owing to the sleep, and to the movements then going on in his sensory organs, as well as to the other facts of the sensory process, is liable to illusion. So that the dream presentation, though but little like it, appears as some actual given thing. For when one is asleep, in proportion as most of the blood sinks inward to its fountain, the heart, the internal sensory movements, some potential, some actual, accompany it inwards. They are so related, in general, that if anything moves the blood, some one sensory movement will emerge from it, while if this perishes, another will take its place. While to one another also they are related in the same way as the artificial frogs in water which severely rise in fixed succession to the surface in the order in which the salt which keeps them down becomes dissolved. The residuary movements are like these. They are within the soul potentially, but actualize themselves only when the impediment to their doing so has been relaxed. And according as they are thus set free, they begin to move in the blood which remains in the sensory organs, and which is now but scanty, while they process verisimilitude after the manner of cloud shapes, which in their rapid metamorphoses one compares now to human beings, and a movement afterwards to centaurs. Each of them is, however, as has been said, the remnant of a sensory impression taken when sense was actualizing itself. And when this, the true impression, has departed, its remnant is still immanent. And it is correct to say of it that though not actually Coriscos, it is like Coriscos. For when the person was actually perceiving, his controlling and judging sensory faculty did not call it Coriscos, but prompted by this impression, called the genuine person yonder Coriscos. Accordingly, this sensory impulse, which, when actually perceiving it, the controlling faculty describes, unless completely inhibited by the blood, it now, in dreams, when quasi-perceiving, receives from the movements persisting in the sense organs, and mistakes it an impulse that is merely like the true objective impression for the true impression itself. While the effect of sleep is so great that it causes this mistake to pass unnoticed. Accordingly, just as if a finger be inserted beneath the eyeball without being observed, one object will not only present two visual images, but will create an opinion of its being two objects. While, if it, the finger, being observed, the presentation will be the same, but the same opinion will not be formed of it. Exactly so it is in states of sleep. If the sleeper perceives that he is asleep, and is conscious of the sleeping state during which the perception comes before his mind, it presents itself still, but something within him speaks to this effect. The image of Coriscos presents itself, but the real Coriscos is not present. For often, when one is asleep, there is something in consciousness which declares that what then presents itself is but a dream. If, however, he is not aware of being asleep, there is nothing which will contradict the testimony of the bare presentation. that what we here urge is true, for example, that there are such presentative movements in the sensory organs, anyone may convince himself, if he attends to and tries to remember the affections we experience when sinking into slumber or when being awakened. He will sometimes, in the moment of awakening, surprise the images which present themselves to him in sleep, and find that they are really but movements lurking in the organs of sense. And indeed, some very young persons, if it is dark, though looking with wide open eyes, see multitudes of phantom figures moving before them, so that they often cover up their heads in terror. From all this, then, the conclusion to be drawn is that the dream is a sort of presentation, and more particularly one which occurs in sleep, since the phantoms just mentioned are not dreams, nor is any other a dream which presents itself when the sense perceptions are in a state of freedom, nor is every presentation which occurs in sleep necessarily a dream. For in the first place, some persons, when asleep, actually, in a certain way, perceive sounds, light, savor, and contact, feebly, however, and as it were, remotely. For there have been cases in which persons, while asleep, but with the eyes partly open, saw faintly in their sleep, as they supposed, the light of a lamp, and afterwards, on being awakened, straightway recognize it as the actual light of a real lamp. While in other cases, persons who faintly hear the crowing of cocks or the barking of dogs identified these clearly with the real sounds as soon as they awoke. Some persons, too, return answers to questions put to them in sleep, for it is quite possible that, of waking or sleeping, while the other is present in the ordinary sense, the other also should be present in a certain way. But none of these occurrences should be called a dream, nor should the true thoughts, as distinct from the mere presentations which occur in sleep, be called dreams. The dream proper is a presentation based on the movement of sense impressions. When such presentation occurs during sleep, taking sleep in the strict sense of the term. There are cases of persons who in their whole lives have never had a dream, while others dream when considerably advanced in years, having never dreamt before. The cause of their not having dreams appears somewhat like that which operates in the case of infants, and that which operates immediately after meals. It is intelligible enough that no dream presentation should occur to persons whose natural constitution is such that in them copious evaporations is borne upwards, which when borne back downwards causes a large quantity of motion. But it is not surprising that, as age advances, a dream should at length appear to them. Indeed, it is inevitable that, as a change is wrought in them in proportion to age or emotional experience, this reversal, from non-dreaming to dreaming, should occur also. The end. Did that make sense to anybody? Because as far as I know, my brain completely freaking melted and came out of my freaking ears. Please like and subscribe, or whatever. Thanks for watching. Bye.